Hello and welcome back to another video on Node.js, specifically on Apollo. So what is Apollo? So it's an industry standard implementation of GraphQL server providing the data layer graph that connect mother web apps to the cloud. Okay, according to the website. So if you want to really commit to the servers, for example, if you want to work or create more ambitious GraphQL project as a part of a much larger team, you can go with the Apollo Federation, Apollo Studio, Rubber CLI. But generally, you're going to use is the Apollo client or the Apollo server. So the Apollo client is this set of front-end library that allows you to make GraphQL query and save data instead of making an HTTP post request to a GraphQL endpoint. So with GraphQL, with Apollo client, we can query our server much like we will, much like you will in a graphical, and it comes with other benefits such as catching the network states, so handling the network loading and error state, and keep your data synced with the server. And then I look at the Apollo server. We have the Apollo client and the Apollo server that allows you to create a GraphQL server in Node, much like using GraphQL package, but with some benefits like it allows you to deploy and run your server-side code in serverless environments such as Lambda, and also allows you to implement subscriptions, which it allows you to push data from the server to the client, to subscriber, to subscribe clients. So much like push notification in your phone, right? So Apollo server wraps all of this functionality, so the ability to deploy your server-side code in a serverless environment, or implement is subscriptions. It wraps all of this functionality and it exposes it individually as a set of npm package. So knowing that, all right, and understand that, I just want to know how to implement a GraphQL or an Apollo server. Okay, and the important to understand is what a GraphQL. No, to understand what a look at this GraphQL. So to understand what GraphQL is, okay, it's a query language for building front-end and back-end application. And the beauty of this is that we can see how all of the different pieces of data relate each other in our server. And then I look at the process of how you can do that by describing the data as schema and using GraphQL to fetch data for ask for data that you want, how it works that, much like you selecting property of an object, and then you get is the result as a JSON object. And the beauty of this is that since the query really match closely the return objects, so we can predict what our query will return, including its all the property, regardless how the data is stored. And we get that data as a JSON. So I also looked at the GraphQL specification, who made that, the front end tools or the framework that allow us to create the the GraphQL clients. So, for example, like Relay using React frameworks, and what are the issues that this type of application solve? GraphQL solve, because like in RESTful architecture, where we have to query multiple collection of values and losing time doing that to compose that in the front end, okay? Or we get some additionally unnecessary data from the backend, we filter out in the browser to show relevant information to the user. Now, with this, right? Then I look at how you can create that from scratch using the GraphQL above, using the GraphQL package, and how you can is define the type system where your server's capability, where you describe is the server's capability, and also how you can scale your application to be to look like a more realistic project. Uh, the two main components in GraphQL like schemas and resolvers. So schema is well allow you to describe the data, okay, and that resolvers is there are functions that resolve or determine the value of a property when you make a query. So the servers call all of these resolvers and then wraps up and send it back to the client. I also look at a lower level of, or a, from the lower level of how GraphQL works, meaning is that under the hood, using is an HTTP post to to hit to send the data to ask the data uh, in a GraphQL endpoint, and also well see how you can implement is the GraphQL server from scratch. The two main components that I already mentioned, like the schemas and the resolvers, how you can modularize your application in a way that is much more scalable and maintainable, how you can query data with some arguments, parameterized queries, and uh, do something called mutations, where this allows us to change the state of our applications. So I also look at these two problems or the GraphQL issue, or what are the issues that GraphQL solve, like the underfetching and the overfetching, something that I already mentioned. The underfetching is that we lose unnecessary time making requests to query multiple collection of values. So this increases the page load time. And the other is the overfetching, is that we send or the server sends on this an unnecessary additionally data, and then we need to filter out in the browser to show relevant data to the user. So okay, this is the two issues that we have in RESTful architectures. A graph solve that by having just one single entry point, and also well provide you types and schemas which makes you so which they so which make a more self-documented API. So our API is now organized in types and fields rather than endpoints. and speed up the development. Again, for developers that are familiar with that, because that's one of the trade-offs. Because RESTful is an architectural that has been for several years, so GraphQL is something that is new and the learning curve might be quite steep. Also, um, when it comes to catching, which is an advanced topic as well, GraphQL has a particular way of doing that, whereas in RESTful we already have proven methods to do that, a proven mechanism that already works. But in any case, then I start to look at how can I create is this much modularized GraphQL server. Specifically, I'm looking at the two components, schema and the resolvers. How can I do that in a much modular way? And the type of operations that we can perform to a GraphQL server. The query, the mutations, okay, and how you can perform parameterized queries, the same for mutations, and how you can organize underneath the hood that so you have your entire pipeline and your entire puzzle complete when it comes to implement query features or mutations, right? And on so once I know that how to do that, right? Then I look at Apollo, which is this industry standard uh, of GraphQL implementations, provide you a data graph layer. Yes, a data graph. Let me look at this. Apollo. Okay. More. Thank you there. Oh my god. Yeah. You're gonna find it. Oh my god. Where are you? Completely, where are you? Where are you? Well, uh, where are you, man? Okay, let me reload this website. Oh, you're gonna uh, mhm. Okay. So now, after I saw that, so Apollo is this industry standard. Mhm. So Apollo is this industry standard of GraphQL implementations, providing you the data graph layer of why. Okay, here. So now you can close this. All right. So providing the data graph layer that connects mobile apps to the cloud. Okay, and then I see that they offering is more advanced tools, especially if you want to create more greater GraphQL project as a part of a much larger team. But basically, you're going to need or you're going to use is two set of tools, the client and the server. Understand what the client is and the server, so I can now implement that, right? And again, this is very narrow specific to this uh, because these implementations or already that package is deprecated. So what I'm going to do here is just to see how you can
Welcome back.
do that.
In this video, we're going to write a fully functional Apollo server. The Apollo Express NPM package that we see in front of us is the most widely used way of using Apollo with Node. It allows us to combine Apollo with an existing Express server to take advantage of the best of both worlds. Now, here's a fun question. Can we convert our existing GraphQL server to Apollo Server Express without too much effort? You might be surprised. Let's dive in and see exactly what it takes. First things first, we're going to uninstall the Express GraphQL library, which we're going to be replacing with Apollo. So in our terminal, we'll do npm uninstall express-graphql.
Okay. So here, in our case, we're going to implement, so we're going to include this GraphQL server.
Question: can we convert our existing
This is building an Apollo server with Node. Building an Apollo server with Node.js. Yeah, building an Apollo server with Node.js. So building an Apollo server with Node.js. How can we include
GraphQL server both worlds? Now, here's a fun question. Can we convert our existing GraphQL server?
So how can we convert our existing GraphQL server into an Apollo server?
To Apollo Server Express without too much effort? You might be surprised.
Without too much effort.
Let's dive in and see exactly what it takes. First things first, we're going to uninstall the Express GraphQL library, which we're going to be replacing with Apollo.
Okay, this uninstalling GraphQL library, and then we're going to replace this with Apollo. We have here git status. Okay, so it's going to npm uninstall the Express GraphQL. This middleware GraphQL. Alright. Because the npm use the version 14, and now you can use this install this on install. Oh my god. Um, uninstall. Okay, so now I can remove this and
So in
install the
our
client.
terminal, we'll do
But
npm
install that
uninstall
particular client.
express-grapql. So I'll clear
You know, it's install that particular client, Apollo Server Express. npm install Apollo Server Express. And this is deprecated, that's right. They tell you all the deprecating warning there. So you, for the sake of example, I'm just using is this for demo purpose. But when it comes to include with other or to convert your existing GraphQL server into an Apollo, it might be quite different here. I'm using is Express
our
for
packages.
this example. Uh, but is at least at least as I at least that I know I can or what I'm doing here. This is enough for me. You know, at least that I know what I can do here, what I'm doing all of this. That will be enough for me.
Are now where they should be. We can go back into the code and remove our express GraphQL middleware that allowed us to respond to GraphQL requests in an express server using the GraphQL HTTP function. So we're going to remove that and replace it with an import of our Apollo Server Express library. This module exports something called the Apollo server, which is going to handle all of our incoming requests, whether they're for GraphQL or another Express middleware in our server. So how do we use this Apollo server anyway? Well, the convention with Apollo is to use a function that we'll define right here above make executable schema that we'll call start Apollo server.
Okay. So it exposes the this function, the Apollo server, right? And what is the convention of how you can use this? Okay, and install the Apollo server. Install Apollo server express this middleware. Okay.
You'll see this in most Apollo projects. Just like every Express server, we're going to initialize our application, calling that Express function. We're also going to make use of our GraphQL tools make executable schema function.
So this is how this works. By the way, to start Apollo. Okay, and inside of this we define is our schemas. I mean, right below the type to the resolver. Here is where we get the app inside of our Apollo. We paste or we take the make executable schema that are highly compatible that are compatible with Apollo,
which is fully compatible with Express GraphQL
which is fully compatible with Express
and Apollo. So we'll move that into our start Apollo function. Let's remove some of this white space here. And we'll also remove this /GraphQL route with our old Express GraphQL middleware that we're no longer using. But if we got rid
then we're going to get rid of this because we're no longer using it.
of the GraphQL endpoint, we need to replace it with something that Apollo provides for us. This is where our Apollo server comes in. we'll create a new Apollo server instance, which will take in some options. We'll see that in just a moment. And we'll assign this to a server constant. This Apollo server object contains all the middleware and logic to handle incoming GraphQL requests. What we're trying to achieve is to make our executable schema with our type definitions and our resolvers. We want this schema to define how our Apollo server responds to GraphQL requests. The way we do that is by passing in the schema object as an option to Apollo server. And Apollo server accepts the schema made by makeExecutable schema from the GraphQL tools library. Apollo and GraphQL tools work so well together because GraphQL tools was originally written by one of the Apollo developers.
Important thing. GraphQL tools and Apollo works really well or highly compatible.
Tools work made by makeExecutable schema from the GraphQL tools library. Apollo and GraphQL tools work so well together
work so well together
because GraphQL tools was
And this is something interesting. This is tip. Apollo, Node. Apollo and Apollo and Apollo and GraphQL tools works
or GraphQL tools library. Apollo and GraphQL tools work so well together because GraphQL
Apollo and GraphQL tools work so well together because the developer
tools was originally written by one of the Apollo developer and GraphQL tools work so well together because GraphQL tools was originally written
because GraphQL tools were originally written
by one of the Apollo developers.
By one of the Apollo developers.
Which makes it much easier to transform projects that use GraphQL tools into Apollo projects if you want to. It's really powerful stuff that we're about to experience. So let's keep going. Because we were already using makeExecutable schema, we can pass that directly into our Apollo server. And we can use this shorthand syntax to make things even cleaner. Now, one reason why we use this start Apollo server function, this is so that we can call await on server.start.
Okay. So since this is an async function, and we can is await for the server start.
This will tell Apollo to prepare to handle incoming GraphQL operations.
This will tell Apollo to prepare the server to handle incoming GraphQL
with Apollo server.start. This will tell Apollo to prepare to handle incoming.
It will tell Apollo to prepare to handle incoming
GraphQL operation.
Exactly. So this will tell Apollo to prepare to handle incoming GraphQL operations.
With Apollo server ready, we can now call server.apply middleware which connects Apollo's GraphQL middleware with our
So this connects Apollo server to Apollo server middleware to Express app or to Express server to an ex to a to Express server.
Express server. We have to tell the function which Express application to connect to by passing in.
And here we say is server to apply middleware which app you want to. In our case, we'll name
The app object, and we can optionally choose a custom path to handle our GraphQL requests.
And optionally, you can set a path to start handling requests to GraphQL.
By default, this is /GraphQL, but we can change this to anything we like. This apply middleware function is basically calling app.use on the middleware that is created inside of our apply middleware function. By default, this is /GraphQL, but we can change this to anything we like. This apply middleware function is basically calling app.use.
It's basically calling app.view and inject
on the middleware that is created inside of our Apollo server. By default, this is /GraphQL, but we can change this to anything we like. This apply middleware function is basically calling app.
This apply middleware is basically calling app
use on.
Okay. Okay. This function is basically calling app.use
the middleware that is anything we like. This apply middleware function is basically calling app.use on the middleware that is created
on the middleware that is created for the
created inside of our
Apollo server.
Apollo server, and then mounting that on the
that is created inside of our Apollo server, and mounting that on GraphQL
path that we specify. It's just a convenience function for exactly that. Finally, we start listening for HTTP requests, whether they're GraphQL requests or other requests that will be handled by Express, by calling app.listen inside of our Apollo server function. So let's move that right underneath where we apply the middleware. And that's basically it. Of course, we have to call our start Apollo server function. So let's do
start Apollo server. Of course, we need to call this start Apollo server function.
Do that right below where it's defined. Will this work? Let's see Apollo server in action. In our terminal, we'll clear the console and npm start. The server seems to be running, so let's load our browser and see what we get under the.
The server seems to running. The server seems to running, and see what we get in this graph. Ready to explore your graph. Query your server. Ready to explore your graph. Get a free private query console and a schema generated docs for your graph in Apollo Studio. Query your server. Automatically redirect to Studio next time. or query this graph directly. Mm, automatically redirect to Studio next time. Oh, what the heck? So localhost here, alright. And then he sent me to studiopole.com. Um, but he's okay.
slash GraphQL endpoint. Apollo server is on port 3000 under slash GraphQL, so let's load it. Hey, okay, wait a second. What's this? This isn't quite graphical. Let's see. We'll check this automatically redirects me to Studio.
But now they're redirecting it to their website so they can keep track where the incoming, where are you querying your data. Ah, interesting. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
select Query Your Server. Let's see what happens. We're taken
And we're
to
taking
this Apollo Sandbox tool.
okay. Once everything is set up with this, git status, git add server, git add everything, git commit minus n to mm-hmm, mm-hmm, git commit minus n convert GraphQL server, convert GraphQL into mm-hmm, exactly into an Apollo server. Convert GraphQL into an Apollo server. Git push origin to main branch, and now git add. Mm, okay. Mhm. Extract GraphQL test. Mm, Everything's done. Mm,
This is an Apollo front-end application that is
mm, but they're
what
going back
happens.
to their studio.
we're taken to this Apollo sandbox.
Navigate to localhost 43,000, localhost 43,000 here. We are taking, we are taking to a sandbox, to a GraphQL, to Apollo sandbox. Because of course our server is not running, and now it is. We're taken to a sandbox
Tool. This is an Apollo front-end application that is much like GraphQL, but is built specifically for Apollo.
We're taken to Apollo sandbox, which is much like graphical, but specifically with Apollo, specifically for Apollo.
We can query our fresh Apollo server in this operations box exactly the same as when we used Express GraphQL. Notice that this Apollo sandbox has pre-populated our query, which is showing us an added feature of GraphQL that we haven't yet discussed. We can name our queries and mutations by adding a name after the type of the operation and before the object, which contains the fields from the response that we're interested in. We could name this anything we like, say funny query, and we can execute it to get the response just like we would with GraphQL. Notice we're getting the orders and listing our single order's date and listing all of the product IDs. Apollo Sandbox has even more features than GraphQL. Notice that we're getting the HTTP.
So Apollo features, so Apollo Sandbox has more features.
Stat product IDs. Apollo Sandbox has even more features than
Exactly. Apollo Sandbox has even more features
GraphQL.
than graphical.
Notice that we're getting the HTTP status code.
Like HTTP status code.
How long the
Time time response.
request token, and even how large
Time response. Payload weight.
the response is in bytes. It's almost like a
Payload weight in bytes.
fully featured postman specific for GraphQL. And just like GraphQL, we can explore our documentation here on the left, listing all of the queries. And if we go back or click on the root, we can also see our mutations. To add a new product, we can click on one of these fields to list all possible arguments and fields in the response, using that as a reference when writing a mutation. For example, we can add a mutation, and if we give it a name, like funny mutation, we'll be able to select whether we want to send the mutation or the funny query to our server. Naming our operations lets us pick and choose which one to execute at any point in time. As an example, let's add a new product inside of our funny mutation here. We'll add new product, passing in an ID, which will make yellow jacket, a description, sunny.
The great thing of this is that this already have a built-in front query testing. This already have a built-in front-end GraphQL test environment or sandbox environment. Whereas with RESTful architecture, you have to download a separate applications like Postman or Insomnia and then perform that query to that. So this comes now with an integrate tool. Okay.
The jacket and a price, which we'll say is $90.88. We'll pick from the result the description of our new product. Notice that now the execute button or the submit operation button here will execute only this mutation. We've added our sunny jacket, and now if we click on funny query and submit that, we're getting 3 products and all of our latest changes. Just a quick sample of what we can do with Apollo. See, that wasn't too large of an effort, was it? All the steps that we've taken to modularize our GraphQL server made it easy to migrate from Express GraphQL to Apollo server. We could now explore more Apollo-specific features and combine them with what we've already built. We could integrate with an Apollo frontend. We could add more specific database features or implement subscriptions. The
Exactly. We can implement more database features or
possibilities are endless. Our GraphQL journey is just beginning, but we've done all of the hard work. Our GraphQL fundamentals are now in place. And that's what I'll leave you with. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
So, with that, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.